The island had been in my family for 3 generations before I ever set foot on it as an owner instead of a guest. My grandfather bought it back when nobody wanted a rock surrounded by cold water and worse weather. And by the time it came to me, the mainland had grown close enough that some committee of homeowners decided the water between us didn't count as a boundary anymore. I found that out the hard way on a Tuesday morning in early spring when a woman named Marguerite Colston walked down my private dock like she'd built it herself. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I wasn't some retiree escaping the world. I still worked, still carried a badge most days, though not the kind people expect when they hear that word. I'll get to that. For now, understand that I was standing on my own dock, coiling a line after checking the moorings from the storm 2 nights before, when I heard heels clicking on wood that had never been walked by anyone in her position before. She introduced herself as the president of the Homeowners Association across the channel, the one that had apparently decided my island fell under some clause about shared waterway access. She said the dock was technically a shared structure now, according to a survey her board had commissioned. I told her the dock was built by my grandfather in 1961, and every inch of it sat on land deeded to my family, notarized, recorded, older than her association by decades. She smiled the way people smiled when they've already decided you're wrong and are just waiting for you to catch up. Then she called the sheriff. I didn't stop her. I actually welcomed it, because I knew something she didn't, something that would matter more than she could imagine in about 11 minutes. The deputy who answered the call arrived by boat, which told me the association had been making calls about this island before, enough times that local law enforcement had a route memorized. He climbed onto the dock, nodded politely to her, and then his eyes moved to me, and something shifted in his face. He didn't ask for my identification. He said my name, followed by a rank, and then he asked if everything was all right before I'd said a single word. Marguerite's confidence cracked, just slightly, like ice under weight it wasn't built for. She asked how he knew who I was, and he said something simple, something that should have ended the conversation right there. He said we'd worked together during a joint operation 2 counties over, back when I was still active in a role that involved considerably more than checking property lines. I won't get into every detail, but let's say my work touched maritime law enforcement, federal jurisdiction over waterways, and enough legal weight that homeowners associations were quite literally the smallest thing I dealt with on a given day. She didn't back down immediately, because people like her rarely do on the first blow. She insisted the survey gave her association rights to the dock regardless of who I used to be, and she pulled out a folded paper like it was a winning hand. The deputy took it, read it, and I watched his jaw tighten in a way I recognized from years of watching people realize they'd been handed something worthless and told it was gold. He explained, calmly, that the survey she was holding covered a public access easement 3 miles north, not this island, not this channel, and definitely not this dock. Someone had either made an enormous error or someone had deliberately misrepresented the boundary to her board to justify claims they had no legal right to make. That's when the story stopped being about a rude neighbor and became something else entirely. Because if you know anything about people who overreach the way she did, you learn that the overreach is rarely isolated. I asked, quietly, who had prepared that survey for the board. She hesitated before giving me a name belonging to a land surveyor who, as it turned out, had lost his license 2 years earlier for falsifying boundary documents in another county. The exact same pattern, the exact same tactic, dressed up in official-looking paperwork to intimidate property owners into compliance before anyone checked the fine print. I didn't say much in that moment. I let the deputy do his job. Watched him take photographs of the fraudulent survey, watched him radio in details that would eventually connect to an open investigation nobody on that dock knew existed yet. Marguerite stood there, arms crossed, still trying to project authority, even as the ground under her plan gave way, one confirmed fact at a time. She tried a different angle, claiming she had no idea the surveyor's license had lapsed, that the board had simply hired the cheapest bid available without asking too many questions. The deputy asked if the board had a habit of skipping those questions, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer ready. If you're the kind of person who enjoys watching someone's confidence collapse in real time, stick around, because this is where it actually gets interesting. And if you want more stories like this landing in your feed, subscribing helps more than you think. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the investigation into that surveyor wasn't closed. It had gone cold for lack of victims willing to come forward, people intimidated into silence by associations wielding fraudulent paperwork like a weapon. My island, my dock, my refusal to fold became the loose thread that unraveled the whole operation. Within a week, my legal contacts had connected her board's survey to 4 other properties across 2 counties, all targeted using the same falsified documents, all pressured into settlements or forced compliance under the same false authority. The association didn't just lose a boundary dispute. They became the subject of a fraud investigation that named board members individually, not the association as some faceless entity, but Marguerite Colston by name, along with 2 others who'd signed off on using that survey, despite warnings from their own legal counsel that it hadn't been verified. Turns out warnings had been raised months earlier and ignored, buried in meeting minutes nobody thought anyone would ever request through public record. I requested them. Buried in those minutes was something even I hadn't expected, a line item approving a payment to the surveyor that was nearly triple his standard rate, with no explanation attached, no competing bids on file, nothing except a signature and a date. When investigators pulled his financial records, they found the overpayment routed back through a private account tied to Marguerite's husband, dressed up as a consulting fee for landscaping work that no landscaper had ever performed. It wasn't just negligence anymore. It was a kickback, small compared to some schemes, but more than enough to turn a civil dispute into a criminal one. The fallout wasn't quiet. Homeowners and her own association, the very people she'd convinced to fund a legal campaign against a family that had owned that island since before their neighborhood existed, started asking where their dues had gone. Turned out, a significant portion had funded not just a fraudulent survey, but a small campaign of harassment against other property owners who'd resisted similar claims. Funds that were never approved through proper channels, never disclosed in financial reports the way bylaws required. Marguerite didn't just step down from the board. She was removed formally, voted out in an emergency session that ran nearly 4 hours, according to neighbors who later told me people were shouting before the vote even started. She was named as a defendant in a civil suit brought by 3 other families who had been bullied using the same fraudulent tactics over the preceding 2 years, and separately charged in connection with a kickback scheme once investigators finished tracing the payments. The investigation into the surveyor expanded further than anyone predicted, eventually connecting to a pattern of falsified documents used to inflate property assessments for kickbacks, a scheme far larger than one island dock or one overzealous association president ever imagined. By the time it was over, she'd lost her seat, her reputation among neighbors who once trusted her judgment, and any claim to the moral high ground she'd walked onto my dock that morning. She sold her house within the year and left the area entirely, according to people who still live across the channel. Unwilling to face the community, she'd spent dues money turning against families like mine. I still live on that island. The dock still stands, older, weathered, entirely mine, exactly as it was before anyone decided otherwise. Sometimes people ask if I felt vindicated watching it all unfold. Watching someone who tried to strip away something my family built get stripped of everything she'd built for herself instead. Vindication isn't quite the word. It felt more like watching a door finally close on something that should have closed a long time before I ever stood on that dock, coiling a rope, waiting for a woman in heels to learn exactly who she was dealing with.